Hi everyone and welcome back to Just for Kicks. Today we'll be talking about all the answers you sent into last week's question, but before we get into that, I owe you all a small update. A couple of weeks ago, I asked which subject you would add to school and which one you would remove. And in last week's episode, I spent a good 5 minutes passionately explaining why I would add financial literacy. And somehow, I forgot to answer the second half of my own question. Well, thanks to a conversation with a friend, I finally have one. I would remove Hindi. Yes, I know, after everything I said about languages, this is wonderfully hypocritical. But it also reminded me how much I disliked learning Hindi in school. So there you have it. 2 weeks later, with a little external influence and a healthy dose of hypocrisy, I finally answered my own question in its entirety. Now, on to today's episode. There are ears that ask questions and ears that answer. That is a quote by Zora Neale Hurston that kept coming back to me as I thought about last week's question, where I asked you guys if you could relive one age from your past, which would you revisit just to see life from that perspective again? I got many different answers, some sentimental, some funny, and some academic. It was a mixed bag. The question came to me because we were talking about school and mainly about the past. Now, I set you two limitations. The first one was that you could go back, but you couldn't change anything. And the second one was that you could select only 1 year from the past. The first rule wasn't popular though. Some of you wanted the chance to go back and fix things. Unfortunately, life doesn't give us that option, so neither did I. The second rule actually didn't affect many of you. The common sentiment was that choosing just 1 year to revisit was difficult enough, so you were almost grateful for that limitation. Now, if this question took you back to a point in your life where you felt your best, you're welcome. I hope some nice memories were invoked, and if you guys were sitting in your happy past even for a few minutes, I would consider this question having achieved its objective. Now, knowing me, you know I found myself wondering why we spend so much time looking backwards in the first place. Why do certain memories stay with us while others disappear? Why is reminiscing a big part of being human? So of course I did some research into it. Now, according to Google or Gemini these days, the main reasons people look back into their past, especially the way I made you look back, is for 3 reasons: psychological comfort, identity, and guidance. Remembering the good times from your past can boost dopamine levels, which help boost your mood and help you find meaning in life. It helps you understand why you were where you are. It can help you increase your faith in your present or the future you're looking forward to. And finally, the past can always help you grow, be it in your career, in your personal relationships, or even just as human beings. I found a Times article that described the past as mythologized. Reading that immediately reminded me of something I'd read once upon a time. R.A. Salvatore wrote, "How many people long for that past, simpler and better world, I wonder, without ever recognizing the truth that perhaps it was they who were simpler and better and not the world about them." And that really made me think, was the world actually simpler or was I? Do I agree with Mr. Salvatore? I think for some things I do and for some things I don't. If he's talking about how the world is today with technology, I'd say both the world and I was simpler. But if he's talking about the rest of the world, it has always been messed up, and I was just aloof to all of that struggle. I was also younger, so my life revolved around me, my family, and my friends. Life seemed simpler back then because we didn't know any better. The teenage years and our 20s are ages where we are only just learning about life. Freedom then meant not having to face bullies, and freedom today means leaving your country for a different one. What you deem simpler is all a matter of perspective. And then I look back at your answers and they all made sense. Every single one was in some or the other way about comfort, identity, or guidance. Or sometimes all three at once. Now, enough psychology, let's get into the stories. I'll start with mine. I chose the age of 16 because that's the year I got into tennis and discovered Novak Djokovic. And if you know anything about me, you know I can bring up his name with or without rhyme or reason. I'm just kidding. I actually chose 16 because school was a tough time. But I started uncovering who I really was when I was 15, and 16 just gave me room to become that person. I chose a junior college where I knew exactly one person and decided to reinvent myself. Nobody knew me, nobody had any expectations of me, and most importantly, nobody was going to bully me. The best part of that year, other than no actual college, of course, was that I scored the worst grades of my life. And there were absolutely no consequences because 11th grade marks didn't really matter. Now, I made one new friend for life. Someone randomly played a song for me on their guitar in the college parking lot. I had a new crush on someone, and for the first time in a long time, I just had fun. The new friendships, the independence, the fun, the larkiness, the feeling that I was finally free to show my real self. Someone else chose the age of 18. For them, it was all about college, the freedom, the fun, and the feeling that life had suddenly become a little bigger. One other person looked back at almost the same stage of life, but through a completely different lens. It was 12 standard, things were hectic, but they were shining. Grades were great, social life was happening, they were dancing, they'd been elected president of the student council, and their life was thriving. Everything seemed to click, even though so much of it was busy and stressful. I also liked that this answer came from someone younger because it reminded me that every stage of life can give you a year you'll always remember. Now, this next person also chose the same age band of 16, 17. This was my mom, and it was 1983. If you heard last week's episode, you know she also added some historical facts to the conversation. I found out how that year was the year Gujarat stole electricity from Mumbai and all trains halted, leaving my mom stranded with a few friends on a local station. But I digress. This was the year she really stepped out into the world as a young adult and explored more of the city she lived in. She also chose this year because she made friends while fighting over who would sit on the first bench in college. People who are still her friends to this day. A quick hi to them if they're listening. Now, speaking of nerds, this next person also chose the age of 16, but for completely different reasons. Reasons I deem beyond my understanding because their reason for choosing it was they could study fluid mechanics all over again. They didn't offer any other explanation or an emotional backstory, and I respect their commitment to their field of work, maybe. Now, fortunately, not everyone in that household answered with fluid mechanics. My friend, who is fluid mechanics' wife, went a completely different way, which surprised me. She chose the age of 33. The year she gave 2 exams, stood up to people much older to her, learned to get her point across to people with opposing views, and became ultra disciplined, all while making a cute baby and not being able to drink coffee. I think now that I list all her achievements, I understand why she chose this year. She was a superwoman in every sense of the word. The next person who answered chose the age of 5. Not because of school or toys, but because they missed their grandfather taking them to kindergarten every morning. I loved the innocence of that answer. Unlike many of the other answers, this one wasn't about a turning point in life. It was simply nostalgia, wanting one small ordinary part of childhood back. While one person missed someone, the next person missed a feeling. They chose the age of 14. They were in a new school, things were going well, they were playing football, and life hadn't yet become a constant stream of worrying about what came next. Then someone else chose the age of 26. For them, it was the year they finally felt like they belonged in their career, or perhaps the year their career finally belonged to them. They left a job that wasn't fulfilling, joined a workplace where they genuinely felt valued, made new friendships, traveled internationally for the first time on their own dime, and as they put it, the year put a little spring in their step. Another person chose the feeling of belonging which they felt for the first time at the age of 28. They mentioned that they met their husband that year, felt seen and belonged like never before, and I'll admit that one made me go, oh. That same year, they also left a toxic job, moved to a new city, but they said something that really stayed with me because it echoed a feeling a few others had as well. They said it was a wonderful year, but they still wouldn't have the strength to actually relive it. I was very happy to inform them, much to their relief, that this was entirely hypothetical and they didn't actually have to. The next 2 answers also made me smile because they're actually from a couple. They both picked almost the same chapter of their lives, which was another set of answers that made me go, oh. But their years didn't look identical. One chose the age 22 to 23 because they started their first job and felt like they belonged to that career even though they didn't actually feel like they belonged to the company they were working at. They made friends for life and also danced with them in a company event. The dancing at the company event wasn't actually in their answer. That's me adding a memory of my own. Now you are reminiscing and I'm also reminiscing. Their partner, though, also chose the age of 22. According to their wife, they left college quite popular and carried that high into their first job. They traveled internationally for the first time that year, started a role they're still in today, and said it felt like everything was finally falling into place. Some people really do get lucky on the first try. I thought it was lovely that they both looked back at almost the same years but remembered them so differently. Now for the final answer, which stayed with me. This person said they found the question incredibly difficult because every stage of their life carried some amount of pain, anxiety, or self doubt. There wasn't a single age they genuinely wanted to go back to, but what made me feel proud of them was that they still found an answer. They said when they turned 28, they decided to leave India and move to London. They moved out of their home for the first time, away from the relationships that weren't serving them anymore, and into a new world where life was scary. But they were standing up for themselves. They also mentioned going on a trip to Scotland with new friends and how that freedom is something they would choose again. To this person, I say you inspire me because they realized that if they didn't have an answer today, they wanted to live the next few years differently so that if someone asked them the same question a decade from now, they would have an answer. Looking back at all of your answers, I realized something important. Nobody chose the years they are living right now. There was only one person who chose a year after the pandemic, which goes to show that life has increasingly become more challenging. Most of us had to reach back into our 20s, or in my case, my teenage years, to find an answer. The ages you chose weren't necessarily the easiest or the happiest. They were the turning points of your life. When you found your people, or your career, or courage, or the year you met your life partner. The year you felt seen, the year you finally felt free to be yourself. They are milestones we rarely celebrate, but judging by all of your answers, they mean the world to us. It also made me question how we reflect on the lives we are living. Maybe we need to live our lives in a way that years from now, the years we're living today become contenders for an answer. And I think that exercise was tough because life is tough. We don't get perfect years. We get moments, many moments, scattered across many years. And I think that's our strength as humans. I don't mean to make this philosophical, but your answers have genuinely made me think like that. So thank you for sharing your answers with me and for being vulnerable. I think most of us are quietly relieved that we don't actually have to relive our past. For once, we're grateful that life only moves forward because it means we still have the chance to make changes. I know this podcast has been quote central today, but one last quote comes to mind before I conclude. Samuel Beckett once wrote, "Ever tried, ever failed, no matter, try again, fail better." Here's to many great years ahead. Years you would happily choose again if someone asked you this question a few decades from now. And here's to this life that we're guaranteed only once. I hope you take that risk you've been putting off. I hope you continue standing up for yourself. I hope you find your people, your place, and the version of yourself that feels most like home. And I hope you look back on this life one day and see that you always did your best. And when you do, I hope these years become a part of your answer. That is all for today's trip down memory lane. I hope it was worth revisiting. Now for the achievement of the week. I made some more progress on my AI learning. I made another trip to the beach because apparently once wasn't enough. And I found a free dance class online which may have made my knee question me, but I would have to report to you that it was totally worth it. After all that reminiscing, I think we deserve a slightly sillier question this week. So the question is ice cream or cake? You can only keep one for the rest of your life. Which one survives and why does it survive? If you've got an answer, don't sit on it for too long. Send it my way before next Wednesday because I'd love to include your thoughts when I record next week's episode. That is all for today. Thanks for sticking around. Bye-bye.